Good afternoon. Good morning, or good afternoon. My name is Renard Harris from the Office of Institutional Diversity, along with Kim Gilliard, Dr. Kendall Dees, three amazing students, Nikki Patel, Adriana Gainey, and Mackenzie Geiger. This is our first peer-to-peer where faculty, staff, and students share with each other in terms of diversity. And for the most part, the office attempts to, if you self-identify, we attempt to support that in many ways and help sustain that and help contribute that to the campus community. So this is our first peer-to-peer with Dr. Sophia Rodriguez, Kianya Booker, and Ashley Vaughns. And it's roughly an hour and a half. Feel free, please, and fill out the forms on the table when you have time if you have to leave early. And we have our open house, Kim, it's this Friday. Our open house is Friday where we will unveil our art, our hall art, where students have come by and kind of painted what diversity looks like to them. We'll have music and food and et cetera. So doing a lot of things. Keep your eyes on our website for next semester. This is our first peer-to-peer. If it goes well, we'd love to do it again with staff, with students, and with faculty with various ideas from the community. So I will get out of the way and let you all do your thing.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Ashley Vaughns, and so I'll be presenting today with Sophia Rodriguez and Kianya Booker. We're here in the College of Education in the Teacher Education Department, and this just kind of came about. We were talking together about ways we can certainly contribute to the campus, and some of what we talk about in our own classrooms, and certainly with our faculty as well, is making sure that we're promoting inclusive classrooms with especially young children we work with, but also how we do that with our students here at the college. And we certainly wanted to share some of what we're doing in our own classrooms with you all. I think one of the important things to say, especially with the way that I work, is that this is a journey that we would say we've been on since we've started teaching and will continue to be on. We don't know everything. We certainly continue to grow in what we do and what we teach, and we rely on our students to give us feedback and inform the way in which we include them in our classrooms, and we also rely on the feedback of each other when we're doing our work. And so that's how we came up with our title. So we are promoting inclusive classroom environments, examining self, because it starts with the self, and then building community in our classroom. And then I'll be talking about some few concrete strategies that I do in my own classroom with students. So we'll go through each of these today. Dr. Rodriguez will start with examining self and what that means and why that's important. Dr. Booker will talk about multicultural course change. So how do you look at what we're already doing in our courses and then transforming that so that we're being more inclusive. And then again, I'll talk about specific strategies that I do to give some concrete examples. So I think everything that we'll talk about today aligns with these goals. And this comes from a curriculum, an approach, if you will, called anti-bias education. And it's pretty popular in the early childhood world, but I think these would be goals that we have for all of us as individuals, and that will tie together our whole presentation. So the first one, each person will demonstrate self-awareness, confidence, family pride, and positive social identities, that including ourselves as educators, but also for our students. Each person will express comfort and joy with human diversity, accurate language for human differences, and deep, caring human connections. And so we'll talk about how we're promoting that. And then each person will increasingly recognize unfairness, have language to describe unfairness, and understand that unfairness hurts. And we'll give some examples, I think, and we'll get to hear from our students as well to maybe share some of their examples. And then lastly, each person will demonstrate empowerment and the skills to act with others or alone against prejudice and discriminatory actions. So these would be goals that we have not only for young children, but I would say for all of our adults as contributing members of our society. So with that said, I'll let Dr. Rodriguez start. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to talk through a couple of examples that I've done in my own class. I had the opportunity to develop a course for the Honors College called Critical Race Issues, in society and education, and I'm now teaching the course for the second time, and it's been a really great opportunity to sort of experiment with helping students develop a critical consciousness and some of these things that were mentioned in the goals, but also a real personal journey and an opportunity for me to grow as a faculty person and as a person who needs to be conscious and aware. I thought I was already pretty conscious and aware of inequality and oppression, but I think teaching this stuff with students who are often encountering it for the first time can be very intense and very sensitive for students. So it's really been quite, as Ashley said, a journey for me to think through my own positioning in the world and sort of practice what I preach. So engage in the same activities and the personal identity work that my students do. So each of the things I'm going to say, I've actually done with my students in various forms, and then my students have also done versions of these assignments and worked through some of the ideas that you'll see here. And then I've invited 4 of my current students who are actually in the critical race issues class, and they will give sort of like a speed dating. This has been the experience in my class, and I asked them to hopefully say nice things. So they will share with you all the ways that they have felt included as part of the class through these activities. So this stuff, they're probably more experts on it at this point than I am. So one of the main assignments that they do, and that I'm going to actually have you participate in a couple seconds here, I do a critical autoethnography, and this is a common assignment. Some of you may do it in your own classroom or versions of it, but essentially I give this definition of autoethnography. My own background is an ethnographer, so I do engage in qualitative ethnographic work where I try to understand the lived realities and everyday experiences of individuals, and I tend to study individuals from marginalized communities. So this is a very familiar sort of process, writing process for me already, but even within this personal work, for many years, I hadn't actually sat down and thought through my own self-study. So this has given me the opportunity to do this and develop this assignment. And for students, I define the autoethnography as writing about yourself as a member of a larger social group. And so as a faculty person, if I'm going to be working with students from diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences, I need to actually understand my own positioning in larger social groups as well as in relation to the social groups that my students are going to be coming from. And so I do share that with them as well. And then the goals of this task are, again, to examine the oppressive effects of society, because often it's difficult. We might start thinking about ourselves, but we don't think about our actions and experiences in relation to larger structural mechanisms and constructions in society. And so that is something that through the reading both I and my students have done by trying to figure out what actually is happening in society, what are the social structures that are contributing and perpetuating inequality and oppression. Another goal of this task is to connect personal experience with other oppressed people through various forms. And you'll hear through the student experiences that they have very different experiences even from each other. And in our class, we're very fortunate to have quite a wide range of experiences. And then the third piece of this assignment is to offer a strategy for social change. So it's not enough to sort of just acknowledge your own personal identities and become aware. There has to be a critical evaluation and actual moment where you think, how can I change or how can I transform either myself in relation to a social structure or oppressive structure or a societal issue. So my students are constantly asked to not only reflect on themselves, but also themselves in relation to social change. So that's a key piece of the assignment as well. These narratives can be used in different formats. If you don't have time to do the full assignment, you can certainly do different aspects of it or different reflections. This is a formal assignment in my class, but it's sort of scaffolded throughout the semester. So the students read a lot of foundational theories and knowledge to sort of ground themselves in how society operates and functions and the different institutional oppression that functions, and then they examine their own life in relation to those, and then by the end of the semester they engage in a more independent form of research where they're looking at a social issue or a societal issue and how they can offer interventions or critical strategies for change. So those are the various components, and I tend to do them over the course of the semester in different stages because it's very overwhelming to do all this work at once, and so they see this in stages. But these are some of the ways that you could use autoethnographic narratives. Many align to the goals that were already mentioned. You want to increase your own insight and self-reflection. You also have the opportunity to examine relationships between power and knowledge and theory and practice. So a lot of times as faculty, and I'm guilty of this too, we get very caught up in the conceptual theoretical ideas, and we sort of convey those to students because it's so important for them to learn the content and the knowledge, but then we may not always send them off with actionable strategies for change in society. So that's a real key piece of this assignment as well. Also, a huge goal, especially for 19, 20-year-olds that I often encounter in my classes, is to locate their self in a larger context. They tend to be very good at explaining their own experiences and their own background, but really thinking about those concretely in relation to what's going on in society is a real challenge and often reward of this type of assignment. And then these are some of the other opportunities, developing compassion and empathy, and again, theorizing models for change. So with that, that's sort of the conceptual foundation that I'm asking you to now turn inward and think through. I have two questions here that what I'd like you to do, if you don't have anything to write down these answers, maybe you can just think about them in your head. But I'd like you to reflect on these two questions, and then I'll have you guys share out maybe with a partner or two. Probably, not the whole table, just because I want people to actually get the opportunity to personally connect with the person next to them, and then we'll take a few volunteers. But the questions that I'd like you to start reflecting on for a moment, and these are again drawn from the critical autoethnography assignment. What are advantages and disadvantages that you've faced in your life due to race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, or immigration status? You don't have to talk about all of those, but if you gravitate toward one, that would be excellent. And if you could think of a concrete example to share, that would be very helpful. And then the other question I have for you to reflect on are, what are the networks of support that you have access to in your life that have led you to acquiring a job, some sort of credential, or some other form of social mobility? So we'll take about 3 minutes for you guys to personally reflect, and then I'll cue you to share with your partner or group of 3. There's like so many typos. I need to fix this. It's driving me nuts. Oh, man. I didn't know that. I guess I didn't really edit this. I guess that makes sense. It's a question. Okay, so can you show me again? Yeah. Why does it not show me the current slide? Oh, wait. Oh, sorry. That's fine. Okay. So there's so many. That would be great, because, well, they're going to record it. That's okay. I know, I feel a little changed today. It's not really my style. Yeah. Okay, as you're wrapping up your individual reflection, I know some people are already talking, so you can go ahead and share maybe with 1 or 2 people next to you what you jotted down for these 2 questions. That was me calling you out, yeah. I'm just trying to constantly model, how I teach. Do you like how I seamlessly just had a way to call you out?
Advantages, disadvantages, not conscious. So I presume that's because advantages are invisible. You don't see it when you walk in an office. People see you're a white male. I don't just presume the same experience everybody has. So, I've never been witness to any overt advantage that is often given to me. It's certainly not any discount. Networks have provided access and support. Definitely, for my kids, my parents chose where we would live based on what the school district was. So I was outside New York City. They came from the Bronx. They got a first generation college education. So we moved to a town where the expectation was, I don't know what percentage, but 90% of the kids went to college. So there was an entire support network in place that was taken for granted. And then I went through small liberal arts college and a scholarship that I'm sure they're big on because they're promising, smart, so I'm sure that was part of that network too, that religious network.
Okay, let's take about 5 seconds to wrap up your conversations. I'm sort of eyeballing the time here at this point, so I'm going to set another about 16 minutes. Is that okay? Is that okay? Should I do like 13 minutes? Next 3, I'm going to be like... Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just call on people to share out. So, Bob, I'll actually start with you. 'Cause I feel like this is my one opportunity, you know, to go ahead and... I know, right? Why don't you go ahead and share out what you chatted with your partner about for question 1?
We never even got to me, but I will give it here.
Okay, great.
We didn't have enough time.
Okay.
Looking at advantages, there's the obvious, white, male, and definitely an English-centric background, ethnicity. But things that you don't see are the fact that I was in a very poor family. And as far as the advantages, I did have a lot of support from both my mother and my grandfather as far as my education was concerned in giving me inspiration, but no financial backing. And literally, I was on my own to take care of that and managed to put myself through 3 degrees in that process. But that was solely on me. I feel like I earned all of that. And, I share the blame with myself for some of the things too, but you know, it was all mine along the way. So,
Have you ever shared that with your students?
I don't think I have.
Yeah, that's typically sort of what I usually hear is that, you know, if we are reflecting on these advantages or disadvantages, or I like the way that you said the things you might not see, because certainly growing up, maybe rural poverty issues, things like that are different experiences and structural experiences that students encounter, or at least have seen in their experience as well. So it might be a way to connect your personal experience and open up a new conversation with students as well.
Yeah, a first generation college graduate.
Okay, can I have another volunteer to share out what they chatted about? Yes, Dr. Lanahan.
We had a lot of interesting comments here, but my comment here is that when I do bring up issues of race, class, and gender as a white male, I am able to leverage my white identity. This is an advantage against discussing these issues, because no one's going to say, oh, Lanahan's bringing up racism because he's a black guy,
Yep.
or bringing up sexism because he's a female.
Yep.
So that is one advantage when discussing these issues that I have with students.
I think that's really important to acknowledge. I was just speaking about that with one of my colleagues as well, given the post-election, the ways that our discussions with our students really differ, he as a white male and me as a female person of color. So that was an interesting thing to acknowledge, and sort of things that we have to grapple with as well. Can I have a volunteer from over here, maybe?
Sure.
Teachers are the worst students, right?
Advantage for me has been being the only black male, only black, African American somewhere, I guess. For me, black, African American, I'm wrestling with. But that's been an advantage because, and you don't know why it's an advantage, it's because I'm the only one, or because it was earned because of my abilities. The advantage has been, the disadvantage has been being the only black male or African American. I wrestle with that. No, but it's been both, and it's been really interesting that it's been an advantage and disadvantage. Yeah, and you, as an individual, you wrestle with why you are earning and gaining, because you have to wrestle with this because I'm black or because I have the ability, and then you don't wrestle with this as much when you have the opportunity to be promoted. You don't wrestle with, no, I won't take it because you want me because of that. You often take it and then you wrestle. You really don't take it and wrestle. So you wrestle with taking it, and you don't share it with anyone else.
Yeah, sort of wondering in the back of your head also what other people think about your experiences. And
but it's very limited. It's a very small amount, but it does brush. You know, it does brush. Now, I think more importantly, wonder might be conceding too easily. I think you find yourself, I can't think of a better term. Yeah, wonder exists. When you're younger, it's wonderment. It's wonder why. But when you get older, it's almost indifference because you don't control the way these things happen.
Yeah, there are other. Oh, go ahead.
In our discussion, when we talk about disadvantages, is that if you fall in a particular group based on race or sexual orientation, you're fighting against obstacles. One of the things I shared with both of my partners here is that growing up in the South, being African American, being someone who at the time wasn't openly gay, but now I am, and dealing with the issues that oftentimes come up in my own culture related to those concerns. My parents always taught me the importance of setting my goals very high, obviously working very hard, because I knew from a young child that given who I was and the environment I was in, I was going to face particular disadvantages. So even though I faced those things, because I set my goals high, because I motivated myself to work hard to attain them, and I was taught that in my home, I was able to overcome certain disadvantages. And then you brought up, which I thought was fabulous, the whole issue of credentials and having access to particular schools. And I know I encountered that in my life, even opposition in some of the environments I was in, because I aspired to go to certain institutions, was successful at getting there. And so at the same time, you face the whole issue of race and discrimination, being from the South, but if you have a credential that is from a school that's a door opener, you can overcome those disadvantages and move forward in society.
Great. Thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, Angela, go ahead.
You had mentioned about whether we share these things with our students.
Yeah.
I always make a point to share this with my students. They always know about my race, my ethnicity, my immigration status, my class, the fact that we literally lived on the other side of the tracks, the ones that people didn't want to live in. And I share that with them because I tell them, statistically, I shouldn't be here.
Right.
My parents didn't know the culture, didn't know the language, and we were poor. And what I'm trying to get them to understand is that if there was a chance for me, and a lot of it was because of the teachers that I had, well then they're going to have students like that in their classes also. They're going to have students that if you look at them, they might say, oh, these kids are never going to make it. Well, if my teachers had done the same thing, it's true. I never would have made it. So I share all of that with my students.
That's great. Yeah, and I think, it could go either way. And I face resistance when I do share certain things, and I've kind of experimented at different stages in the semester of when to share things about my own personal experiences as well. I personally would advocate for doing that always because, like I said, when Bob was speaking, it can always potentially open up a conversation, but unfortunately it can also close down one for students. But I think one of the most difficult challenges of, I have the, advantage of studying this stuff, so I'm constantly thinking about it, but the hardest thing for our students to often imagine is a different experience than their own, and move from sort of the individual to the societal level. And I think potentially your comment about they may, even if they haven't experienced depression or experienced inequality, they might, in our case, we work with pre-service teachers, they might encounter that with their students and that awareness of it. Okay, so for those of you that didn't share, I encourage you to keep what you wrote down or thought about in your own mind as you go forward. And again, this could be a month-long session, so thank you guys for kind of dealing with the fact that we're going to just keep moving forward. So one of the things that I was thinking through as I was developing what I was going to say here is sort of my own pedagogical conceptual framework, and these ideas are drawn both from the theory that I study, but also how I approach my teaching. And the first, dimension being autoethnographic work, both for my own identity work as a faculty person, my own positioning, working with the students that I do, and then I have students do that assignment as well. And then these are some of the other key concepts that function as part of my own pedagogical framework. And obviously as a teacher, with a background in teaching, these things are things I've thought about, but by no means have I implemented them in my classroom, until really recently, and intentionally, I think is what I really mean by that. So even if you're not in education, there are still ways for you to understand and point out oppression and white supremacy and really name our privileges and the ways in which society is functioning currently and has in the past. And so these are some of the definitions, and I'm not going to talk through all of them, but I wanted to at least share a couple things with you. So I draw particularly from critical pedagogy, which has these roots in humanizing material and content and really building strong relationships with students. And in order to do that, I argue here that we have to personally identify with ourselves and our positioning through that autoethnographic work, but also be willing to be vulnerable in front of our students, be willing to not think that we're all the expert. I had a student share with me, and I don't want to steal your thunder, Erin, but one of the things that we were talking about is often students, when interacting with faculty, they feel compelled to say something intellectual or say something smart, rather than just sort of be the 19-year-old that they are, and kind of as faculty understand that they're processing these ideas as a 19 or 20-year-old, not as a person with a PhD. So I think, not that PhDs necessarily mean anything, but I think that it's important for us as faculty to humanize our students and to recognize that they're going to talk about these issues in very different ways that we might. And in some ways even better than we do. So I think that's the first tenet of the critical pedagogy that I wanted to mention. And the other two things I wanted to talk about briefly here are the notion of white privilege. A very common text that's used, and some of you may have heard of it, is Peggy McIntosh's Invisible Knapsack. And in that piece, she talks very briefly about the different forms of privilege that she has as a white female, and how she encounters the world through these forms of privilege. And she argues that white privilege is sort of a system of advantages. So that's why I asked you that question and at the beginning, thinking through what advantages have you just experienced just from your very being and your very notion of walking through the world. And for years I've used this piece in all of my classes, but over the past couple years as I've encountered students writing reflections on this piece, I started to become kind of angry about the responses I was getting, because this tends to be a sort of check the block, like, yes, I have white privilege, boom, I'm done, move on to the next assignment. And so recently, a philosopher of education, Barbara Applebaum, came out with a piece critiquing what she called white privilege pedagogy. And so in it, she basically argues that we can't just point out the effects in society of privilege and the way that white privilege functions and have our students, again, check the box and say, yes, I'm privileged. We actually have to think about the systems of oppression that are functioning at the structural level and identify the way that whiteness is used as a norm, and it's taken for granted often by people who are white to kind of ignore the other structural forms of inequity in our society. And this can be really difficult to talk about with students, because often they come to us with 18, 19, 20 years of a completely opposite worldview, through no fault of their own, but it may have just been the social, cultural context that they grew up in. So I encourage you to think about, and I'm happy to share resources, but think about these definitions of white supremacy, these definitions of white privilege, both from your own experiences and how you've experienced them or been complicit in them, in their perpetuation, but also through functioning, what Omi and Winant call these code words, things like diversity and multiculturalism. I have sort of a strong reaction to those terms because they tend to be code words for what we actually should be calling racial oppression and white supremacy, and it can be very difficult to sort of name these issues. And I just encourage you to keep in mind that we will not be able to move forward if we continue with what Bonilla Silva calls the polite talk. We have to sort of name these issues at a deeper level and our own complicity in them. And then the last couple things I want to say here, just these are, again, I don't know if we're going to share these slides, but I'm happy to, but these are sort of the different ways that white supremacy in particular functions in society in sort of socially unacceptable ways, but then you notice all of the ways that it functions in very socially acceptable ways. So again, encouraging you to reflect upon things you've either argued yourself or experienced yourself, or also the things you've observed in society and how we might move forward for that. So with that, I want to just say that that's my sort of framework for approaching teaching. And the last thing I'll have each of my students do is share with you how they've experienced, sort of in the spirit of critical pedagogy, I'm bringing in my students as equal experts in this process, right? So they're going to share with you how they've experienced this pedagogical conceptual approach that I use in my class. So I'm not sure who wants to go first, but we don't have a lot of time, so don't be shy. You can stand up right there if you want.
Hi, my name is Patel. In Dr. Rodriguez's class, we look at a lot of reading that talks about the theories of how race is a social concept and like how it's formed in our society. But more than that, the thing that makes, I feel like for me especially, to just open up and like share my experiences is we always connect our reading to our lives, not just things happening in society in general, but connecting those things to what happens to us and how we develop our sense of self and our belief system. So I think that's the biggest thing that helps me open up and share my experiences, because from the beginning of class, we've always, okay, how do we connect this to what we've experienced throughout our life? So it just, in a discussion setting, we're just very open about connecting ourselves and our lives to the reading.
Hi, I'm Monica. For our class is an honors class, and I don't know how other classes operate because I've really only taken those humanity-wise. But we sit in a discussion setting, like she was saying, and and sometimes based off the readings, Dr. Rodriguez will ask us a question, and we'll just talk about that for the whole class, and it won't deviate to another thing that we were supposed to read or whatever. She'll just let the conversation continue. And even though it kind of seems sometimes oh, we didn't get that other thing done, it's really helpful because we're able to go so deep into what we believe and think and experience while Dr. Rodriguez is giving her opinions and experiences at the same time. And so it's kind of that connection between us and her where we're all on the same level on this circle, just talking about what we experience and whatever inequalities or whatever our reading was about that day. It's really helpful to connect with the teacher, especially whenever you need to if you need help on the outside or on the inside of the class with something you're writing, you can really just know that you can go to her and talk about whatever experiences you have with pedagogy.
I'm Erin, and I think Dr. Rodriguez does a
Sorry.
really good job listening to her students. And like she said, it can be really hard to connect our personal lives to these readings and analyze ourselves in a way we haven't before. But in this kind of discussion class, on previous discussion classes I've had, I feel very comfortable sharing something, even if it's not a very intellectual comment or if I'm just confused about it. And
She always asks questions to make sure she understands what we're saying, and she can do a good job like connecting. Like if we're like, this is a story in our lives that I think I kind of see how it connects to the reading, like she can help us further understand that and like really respond directly to our questions. And I think it just makes like for a really comfortable, open environment.
I'm Katie Johnson. I'm also in Dr. Rodriguez's class, and just kind of going off of what everyone else has been saying. When I wanted to take this class because I felt like, as someone who never was kind of underprivileged in a racial sense, I wanted to kind of more fully understand racial issues in society. But I felt like I wouldn't really be able to connect personally, and when we had to do the auto-ethnography, I was really intimidated because I felt like I wasn't going to, be able to put myself in a situation that would relate, to what we were talking about in class. But Dr. Rodriguez's approach to these issues and what we're talking about is so kind of versatile that really anyone can find how they fit in to these different issues that we're talking about. And so I was really able to kind of do some soul searching and write an autoethnography that was really kind of self-satisfying to me. And I felt that way with all of the issues that we've talked about in this class. So I just think that it's it's really important to be able to have a variety of interpretations of anything that you talk about in the classroom.
Thanks, Katie.
Hi everyone, my name is Xander Millette. In the first few weeks of of the time in the class, Dr. Rodriguez started to share personal stories about what she's experienced in her life and some of the discrimination that she's faced. And the fact that she initially shared some of the things that she might not necessarily feel safe talking about, that allowed me personally to feel like I was in a safe space, I guess, if you could say that. So the fact that Dr. Rodriguez shared some of the things, and I could tell that she felt very safe explaining these things to us, that made me feel like I could share whatever I wanted to Dr. Rodriguez. So when we had to write our critical autoethnography papers, I actually approached her during her office hours, and I said that I'm gay, and she obviously didn't really.
I wasn't like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was all crazier, asking a ton of questions or anything. She was very accepting, and I just felt extremely comfortable telling her that. So the fact that she made me feel safe is a really good thing to do. So yeah.
Thanks, you guys. And I would love to have a great reflection about all that. But hopefully, the reason I invited them, one, was, again, to sort of practice what I preach. Because I really do believe that I can sit here and write about these issues and talk about them, but we're responsible for preparing people to go out into their respective professions. And the thing I love about this particular group is they're all very different in what they're studying and what they're going to do, but hopefully they're more equipped, not necessarily, this is the first step, sort of just acknowledging these issues. But again, all of the things that they're saying are sort of, for me at least, rooted in ideas that as a faculty member I think we need to think about. So thank you guys for your time. And